on this subject of the answering of questions that are not asked in the class. That, of course, those who have been through classes with me before know that that is the usual routine, and it comes about in this wise. The subject about which we were just speaking, the kingdom of God, is within. Now, actually, God is my consciousness. God is the only consciousness I have. And that means that my consciousness is infinite. But if that is infinite, that consciousness is yours. So there's nothing of truth going on in your consciousness that isn't known to me. And as you enter that, there is nothing of truth in my consciousness that isn't known to you. Don't mistake that for mind reading. This is not human mind reading. You can't read another person's thoughts. But the mere fact that there are questions in this room, those questions aren't in this room. Those questions are in consciousness. But that consciousness is as much my consciousness as it is yours. You see, my consciousness is your consciousness. That is why every realization of truth that I have is made manifest in your mind or body or pocketbook. In other words, you respond to every awareness of truth that takes place in me. You have undoubtedly attended lectures where people unknown to the lecturer were healed in that room. An experience like that took place many years ago at a lecture of Judge Green's, when I, for 2 or 3 years, had had an infected ear, and it had not responded to any science help. But this particular evening, Judge Green was lecturing up at 178th Street Church, and I went up there to hear him. And in the midst of his lecture, there was a crack like that, and my ear was completely restored, and has been ever since. That's way far more than 20, 25 years ago. But I see Judge Green never knew me, and I didn't know Judge Green, and he didn't know my need, but an activity of spiritual truth was taking place in his consciousness. I had brought myself into his consciousness by coming to that church. I didn't go to that church. I had no interest in that church. I didn't go to an edifice, and I didn't go to hear a man either. I went to enter the spiritual consciousness of Judge Green, and those who know him can tell you that he's a very spiritual consciousness. Now then, the same thing happens when you go to a practitioner. You do not enter their office. You enter their consciousness of truth, not their human mind. You have no interest in that. They have no interest in yours. But you, by saying, help me, are not saying help me to a man or woman. You are speaking to a divine state of consciousness, and then you relax in their divine state of consciousness. Now, the moment a truth is realized in their consciousness, you feel it within your mind, body, or purse, as your need may be. And you say, oh, I felt an uplift, or the fever came down, or a check came in the mail. Do you see that? That was the activity of truth in the consciousness of the practitioner made manifest in your affairs. Now, as we come together here, and you know I didn't send for you and you didn't send for me, something beyond both of us brought us into this room, all of us. All right? That was the activity of divine consciousness. And here is that activity of divine consciousness up here on this platform. And that activity of divine consciousness is acting in you. Now, how can you have any secrets from me or I from you? But not as person to person. Do you see? I don't know that you are asking the question. I merely know that that question's here and it's being answered. There have been times in our work when I knew exactly where the question was and who was holding back and not answering or not asking it. Do you see? That does happen sometime, that you can almost feel it or see it in the air. But it isn't the necessary thing. The necessary thing is that when I come here, I do not come here thinking that my understanding can help you. I must understand that only the activity of truth operating as my consciousness can meet your need. And so it is, those who come here thinking that they're going to hear a statement of truth that's going to miraculously do something for them will miss the way. Or those who come because somebody says, oh, you ought to hear so-and-so, he's wonderful or she's wonderful, they're going to miss the way. What came you out for to see? What went you out for to see? A man in a robe? It's going to disappoint you. But if you come in the realization that we are in one place, of one mind, why are we here? For the revelation of truth. The revelation of truth in my consciousness, and the revelation of truth in your consciousness. But there is only one consciousness. And so, since I am come that ye might be fulfilled, that divine consciousness in you is there that you might be fulfilled. And that divine consciousness in me is here that you might be fulfilled. Do you see that? And so it is that as a rule, almost any night of the week you can be assured that nearly every question will be answered. Somewhere along the line, however, there is a question here and a question there that escapes answering. And it is for that reason that I encourage those that have been missed to be given in writing. But you can see how few they are when in a whole week there has just been one question. And incidentally, if you look at my pad, you'll see it would have been answered without that question, because right on top it says, fullness of individual being, nothing can come to but must flow out. You see that? And so that's the way that happens. Where two or three are gathered together, there I am in the midst. Do you see that? And that is the truth. Wherever we are gathered together, and remember this, it isn't just people coming together that make the Christ there. It's why they come together, the motive that brings them together. I have told the story of a man who came to my office in Boston, and he began immediately to tell me how many years he had been a scientist and how many years he hadn't missed a service and how many years he had ushered and done the lesson and all the rest of the wonderful things that he should do, and he had done but had not received a healing. And so when he was speaking about his long unbroken record of church attendance, I asked him why he went to church. Oh, well, to get truth, to learn more about truth, to get more understanding. His whole idea, of course, was to get. Well, of course, to him that hath not shall be taken away even the little that he hath. And I explained that to him. I said, that's where you have failed. To begin with, no Christian Scientist should ever go to church to get. A person who knows himself as a Christian Scientist already is supposed to know that they are the full and complete representation of God, and that they haven't a single quality underived from deity. Those are quotations from the textbook of Mrs. Eddy. Now, how can a person who knows that they are the full representation of God and hath not a single quality underived from deity go to church to get something? Error number one. Error number two. It says in the manual of the Mother Church that you must pray for the congregation exclusively. It doesn't say you must go there to pray for yourself or to get a self-treatment. You are there to pray for the congregation exclusively. And so I told him that the next time you go to church, be obedient to the manual and pray exclusively for the church, for the congregation, and go there in the knowledge that you are the full representation of God and that you haven't a quality underived from deity, and that your knowing of this truth will bless all those in that edifice who do not yet know it. His second Sunday, he was healed. Do you see that? That's the answer. Always remember this. As spiritual being, you cannot get. You can only give. You can only share. You can only bless. You can only bestow. There's nothing for a spiritual being to get. A mortal must get the understanding that they are immortal. Then they're no longer mortal. And so if we come together in the spirit of giving. Now, I used to say this to patients all the time. How would you like to go to Jesus Christ feeling that he thought he was going to make his demonstration of supply from you? How would you like to go to Jesus Christ feeling that he was there because he was going to get something from you? Oh, horror. You couldn't take that for a moment. You know right well that when you go to Jesus Christ, you go for only one purpose, and that is to be blessed by a state of consciousness that knows that it needs nothing. It has everything of the Father. Well, now what's the difference between Jesus Christ and your practitioner or teacher? None whatsoever, if they realize that the mind that was in Christ Jesus is the mind of the practitioner or the teacher or the patient. And unless one knows that the mind that was in Christ Jesus is the individual mind, the mind of the individual, what right have they to be a practitioner or a teacher? Now, when we come together in the realization that the mind that was in Christ Jesus is our mind, then you come here to be blessed and to bless. If you thought it was just to carry away a blessing or to fill a vacuum, you would miss the point of this classwork. This classwork is a revelation of God. Now tell me why God shouldn't just as well reveal itself in your consciousness as mine. Certainly you know that no individual has a monopoly on divine revelation. And we have been led here for the purpose of revelation, not for the purpose of Joel revealing, merely for the purpose of God revealing. So why isn't God revealing it in your consciousness at the same moment that God is revealing it in my consciousness? God may reveal it in my consciousness as speech and in your consciousness as hearing. But on the other hand, you may be getting it simultaneously with me, and as a matter of fact, it has happened so often in our classes that students have come afterward and said, I didn't really have to come tonight. I got this whole lesson this afternoon. Why not? Why not? There's neither time nor space in the one consciousness which we are. And so as you realize the divine nature of your consciousness and mine, you begin to understand oneness. Then you know all things, all spiritual things, all right things. And not only you know all spiritual and right things, but you have the intuitive warning when any wrong thing is getting in your way. See how that all fits in together? Ah, yes. I found this week that I've been up against more antagonism outside the class than ever before. Others in the class have told me this also. Why? Well, now, isn't that clear? Isn't that clear? What is happening this week in class? How much do you think of so-called mortal mind or human belief is being destroyed? How much of human belief is being torn down? And is it necessary that anyone know that you're here to feel the degree of purity in your consciousness? No. Hasn't it always been true that the moment a person of vision lifted up their head, that the world took pot shots at them? Hasn't that always been true? Wasn't it true with Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? Wasn't it true with Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah? Wasn't it true with Jesus, John, Paul? That in proportion as they became illumined, they antagonized the human thought. They became enmity to the human thought. Why? Because the human thought is about to be wiped out as it comes into your presence. The human thought is going to be dissolved the minute it gets near you without even knowing who you are. I wish you could see the strange experiences that sometimes happen when people see me day in or day out or week in or week out along the waterfront in Hawaii and then say, well, Mr. Goldsmith, what is your business? Oh, I haven't got a business. Oh, you haven't? No. What do you do? I write books. Oh, that's interesting. What are your late books? Oh, my late books, my early books, they're all the same. I only know one subject. My subject is God. Oh, if you could see how quickly some of them get up and move away, as if I had leprosy. Oh, that's a word that some of them just cannot take. They don't want to get too close to that thing called God. And you can't blame them. If they get too close, they're just going to get an awful wiping out. And so it is. In the old days, Mrs. Eddy called that chemicalization. We don't call it chemicalization, but it is the light shining in dark in your consciousness, and as it touches the outside world has a feeling of it. Sometimes they even get the thought that you're superior. And then comes a little envy, a little jealousy, a little malice, a little disbelief, and also superstition. Don't forget that many people are very superstitious about anyone that gets too close to God. And it is, as a minister explained to me, the will of God for man is evil. Always evil and always destructive. Now just think what happens when you come along and you're close to God. You have to be very destructive. And so it is true that at times it seems that you are arousing antagonism in the without, and sometimes you do. That is why it has been said that your enemies are those of your own household. It was within the household of Jesus that he found his antagonism, not only in his human family of mother, father. There were plenty of antagonism there in his early years. Unbelief, disbelief. But look at the occurrences in his spiritual household. Judas, Thomas, Peter, 11 disciples falling asleep. Oh, the troubles of the Master with those of his own household. And why? Jealousy on the part of some, disbelief on the part of others, superstition, fear on the part of others. And so he aroused those things. We today are not arousing that antagonism. And the reason is this. In those days, probably the direct evils of the Hebrew church, with its sacrifices and its selling of doves and its money changing, was so acute that I haven't any doubt that Jesus fought it, and the disciples. And that's always very unwise. Never fight, never argue with church or with government. Agree with thine adversary. Resist not evil. There's a secret behind all that. Many years ago, there was an opportunity to be a little bit mean toward the Mother Church, Christian Science Church. And when this thing was presented to me, my answer was this. Personally, I have nothing against the Mother Church. Having been in Boston 10 years, I haven't any fault to find with it. Some human faults, sure, but that couldn't be avoided in the Mother Church. It couldn't be avoided if you had a church or I had one. So I have no antagonism to them. But if I had, I wouldn't join any such thing. Why? Well, haven't we been taught in Scripture that if this is of God, don't be found fighting against it? And if it's of man, it'll destroy itself. So why should I go out to battle and get killed? Let it destroy itself, whatever is of man, and let that part of it which is of God bless those that it can bless. Now, so it has been my attitude not only with all churches, with all governments, with all religions, with all ideologies. Why fight? That which is of God must and will sustain itself unto eternity, and you're fighting it, or my fighting, or somebody else is fighting it, is never going to do it one bit of harm. But whatever there is that is of man, whether in government or in church or in human nature, will ultimately destroy itself. All evil eventually is self-destroyed. So that we should not go on crusades. We should not even battle what little of error we see in organization, because actually it isn't any evil. It's just a necessary part of all forms of organization. And if there's some human error there, remember that if we had an organization, we'd probably have 10% more than they have. No, because they did have very fine guidance in the building of that Christian Science organization. And for that reason, they have much better organization than most churches can boast. Why then should we battle? No, the battle is not yours, it's God's. So whatever is wrong in your consciousness or mine, don't go fighting it. Rest a bit and let God handle it. And whatever is wrong in the consciousness of our friends or of our enemies, rest too in God and let God handle it. The battle is the Lord. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. The battle is not yours, but God's. Agree with thine adversary while thou art in the ways with him. Resist not evil, and it will flee from you. Do you see that? But very often, oh yes, it's in the nets, in the leave your nets. I said there about how as we come to this truth, many beautiful things happen unless temporarily we forget ourselves and go out and try to save the world. Don't go out and try to save the world. Don't try to sell the infinite way to anyone, no matter how wonderful it may be to you. Wait for an invitation. It's all right, yes, to give a cup of cold water. It's all right if one is in distress to offer them a pamphlet or a book, but drop it there. Drop it, drop it. Don't go out on any campaigns of battle. We don't need any more St. Paul's out on the touring the world. We don't need any more Christian martyrs. All we need is one thing, that we realize Christ as our individual being, and let that be the light unto the world. Then as the one or two or three come together, let us freely share. Freely we have received, freely give. I'm sure you know that we could have put an ad in the paper and probably doubled the size of this class. Could have sent out notices a month in advance and doubled it. Why should we? Those whom God appointed to be here are here. How they got here is God's business and your own. But you're here by God's grace. I'm here by God's grace. Now what difference would it make if there were a few more here? If they had meant to be here, they would be here. Do you see that? And so it is. Be perfectly willing to share the light that you have received, but be very careful that you don't go out and do battle to get anyone to accept it. Because we are not in a hurry at all. Not a bit in a hurry. Many, many years ago, when I was but a child, I decided to stay here until I was 200 years of age, and then decide how much longer I wanted to stay. So I'm not in a hurry. And I've learned since then that we can walk in or out of this plane of existence at will as soon as we reach a certain plane of consciousness. We can remain or we can go, but whichever we do, life will go on uninterruptedly and progressively. And those who remain behind on this plane will continue to progress in accord with their own state of grace. You can't hurry anyone, and I can't hurry anyone. So we might as well just be the light and not rouse antagonism. People say very often, what is your religion? I don't know. Only religion I have is believing in God. And that's all. It doesn't satisfy a lot of people because they want a name on it. Well, if I give them the name Infinite Way, it means nothing to them. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. We were on the lanai of a large hotel. I was introduced to a group of people one night, and this man and woman were talking, and the man said, you know, we were just talking, this lady and I, about God. She seems to believe there is a God. And I was trying to convince her that intelligent people don't believe that anymore. That's just the superstitious people and stupid people. And she wasn't wholly agreeing with me, although she felt there might be something to it. What do you think about it? Well, I'll tell you the truth. I'm one of these fellows that knows something about everything, but you just happen to touch on the one subject I'm in ignorance of. I don't know anything about God, so I can't answer. As you see, now there's a bright-looking man, intelligent-looking man, and he doesn't know anything about it. Now, can you imagine my standing there and telling them that there is a God and what we think of God? I would first have had to wipe out what either one of them thought God might have been. And, oh, no, life isn't. But it worked out in a miraculous way so that one of them at least did become interested. When I left, the man who introduced us said, you know who that man is? No. He's a man who's written 10 books on the subject of God. So a few days he looked me up. You want to know what I meant by that? I said, well, I was entirely truthful with you. You asked about God, and of course I had an idea of the God you were thinking about, and I really know nothing about it and don't even believe it exists. I would have had to be in agreement with you. The God you were talking about, I really don't think exists. Oh, that was different. That he might have a wrong concept of God. And before he was through, he was finding out what I thought God was. Not through any speech. I wasn't there to teach him. I just told him where to find the books. But you see how it works out. Proselyting isn't good. And that arouses antagonism, giving the appearance that you know something the other fellow doesn't know. That's why I'm so glad that in this day we can wear business suits and soft collars and not have to identify ourselves as people who know all about God with robes on. Jesus changed water into wine. What then did Paul mean when he says, take a little wine for your stomach's sake? He healed spiritually. The subject of wine is an interesting one, but it plays havoc with us because of our metaphysical backgrounds, more especially Christian Science. Wine in and of itself isn't any more harmful now than it was in the days of the Master. I doubt there's very little drunkenness spoken of in the Bible except in those circles where you would expect to find it in palaces, kings, and so forth. But ordinarily speaking, you don't find much of drunkenness among wine drinkers. And for the simple reason that there isn't big enough alcoholic content in wine to do any damage unless one did make a pig of themselves, swine. Now, wine was not only the drink of the sacrament, it was a church drink, but it was as normal a household drink as you could get. Water had not then been purified as it is today. Water had not been controlled, was not controlled then as today, and the most sensible drink at mealtime would be a glass of wine. Now, the same thing is true, even though we do have pure water today, and an abundance of it, and have no need of wine. Actually, a glass of wine, whether it's French wine, Portugal wine, Spanish wine, or California wine, is absolutely harmless. And to have a drink with one's dinner would be harmless. Or to have a drink on a Saturday night or Sunday with one's dinner would be utterly harmless. There's nothing of harm in it, any more than there would be in a Coca-Cola, and probably even less than there is in a good-sized ice cream soda. But wine has become identified with alcoholic drinks, dangerous drinks, harmful drinks, destructive drinks. And because American society hasn't been up to the absorbing of alcoholic drinks except in destructive amounts, alcoholic drinking is not good. And alcoholic drinking is, in metaphysical circles, forbidden, banned. And it is for that reason that, for our own sakes today, it is better that we not be identified as wine drinkers, because that identifies us as drinkers of alcohol, and that brings us into the company of those who are setting a very bad example for all humanity. There is no good in alcoholic drinking. There is no harm in a glass or two of wine. But since the public will not accept that distinction, and even the drinking of a glass of wine identifies us as drinkers of alcohol, we, in our spiritual life, leave it out. Not with condemnation, not with criticism, merely from the standpoint of not being identified with alcoholic drinking. And so we leave it alone. But as in the days of Jesus, so in the days of today, if there were such a thing as just having an occasional glass of wine and not being identified as an alcoholic drinker, there would be no harm in it. And so the harm in it really is our identification with alcohol and the fact that we lend encouragement to those who are drinkers of stronger concoctions. That, to me, is the story of wine. There is no harm in it. There is only the harm in alcoholic absorption, the drinking of strong alcoholic drinks. So for our sake, with no condemnation and with no criticism, we are better off not to be identified with it, not to drink it, not to be associated with it in the public's mind. One thing, however, and now this is purely from the standpoint of a true spiritual teaching, please do not put evil in alcohol. If you do, alcohol will come back at you. The moment you acknowledge a presence or power apart from God, you are no longer in a spiritual ministry. Why is this? Because sadly enough, one of the major problems that comes to a practitioner today is that of alcoholism. There isn't a day in the week that a busy practitioner doesn't receive one or more cases of alcoholism, both with males and females, men and women. It is a very sad state of society, and the practitioner who lives in fear or judgment of alcohol cannot heal it. Cannot heal it. if you put any more power in alcohol than you do in germs, if you put any more power in alcohol than you do in cancers and consumption, you are going to be the victim of them. Your only salvation spiritually is to know God as the substance of all it is, and anything that doesn't appear to conform to that to be only a concept of God, not God itself. God is infinite substance and being. Now, whatever it is that appears to you that isn't spirit and of spirit has no existence except as a concept. And that concept of what? What is it that is being misseen, misconceived? God. God is the only substance. Now then, to understand that will not only free your friends, patients, students from the claim of alcoholism, but even if there were a lingering taste in you for some of it, it would remove it. And the reason is this. The moment a person says that they fear alcohol, or they hate alcohol, or they condemn alcohol, they have set up a presence and power apart from God that can very well take possession of them. On the other hand, the moment a person gets the opposite belief, that alcohol is something good and of God, then they become a victim of it. Therein must we be careful, not to call it something separate and apart from God, and not to call it something of God. You see, I have heard people say they don't fear alcohol at all, they can drink all they want, and they do, and show it, in spite of their not fearing it. Now, I don't fear it because I have seen God as the substance of all reality. But in seeing God as the substance of all reality, I've lost all my taste for false concepts. You follow that? Well, it's the same way. It is just as erroneous to look at a sick person and say you are spiritual as it is to look at them and say you are mortal. They are neither spiritual nor mortal. God is the only spirit, and God is all that is spiritual, and God is all that is spiritually real. And any appearance that doesn't conform to that is a false concept of God. It can neither be error nor spirit. And you know, that's the most important point in all healing work. So if you don't understand that, stay here, even if we have to serve breakfast. If you do not understand this point, get it tonight. God is the substance of all that is. God is the substance, the law, the continuity, the activity of all that exists. Can you see God or God's formation? No. No, you never will see it with your eyes. That's an utter impossibility. Then is this God or a formation of God? No. What is it? Is it error, evil? No. What is it? It is a concept of God's form, a form of God. It is a concept. It is a concept. You who know Christian Science ought to remember that. Sometimes beautiful, always erroneous. You ought to know that. No matter what it is that you see with your eyes, It may be beautiful, but it's erroneous. Erroneous in the sense that it is not God or God manifest. You cannot see God with your eyes, nor can you see God manifest. So whatever you are beholding is a concept, sometimes beautiful, but always erroneous, says Mrs. Eddy. Couldn't be more wonderfully put than that. Now, the mistake in healing, and the reason for failure to heal, is that the moment somebody says the temperature is 99 2/5, you say, oh, isn't that wonderful? And you think you have a spiritual demonstration, even knowing that tomorrow it may be up to 100 again. Now please remember this. If you can see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, it isn't God or of God. It is a concept of God. Now when you see a healthy human being, you are merely seeing a better concept. And when you see a sick human being, you are merely seeing a poorer concept. But when you understand God to be true being, then that poorer concept gives way to the better concept until the day of transition. I don't mean passing on. I mean the transition in consciousness to the realization of, God is my life. Now that's not a concept anymore. Now that is God itself made evident. Only you still won't see it with your eyes. You will discern it inwardly, as Peter did when Jesus said, who do ye say that I am? And Peter said, oh, thou art the Christ. Now he didn't see Jesus with his eyes and call him Christ. He looked right through the eyes of Jesus and saw there the soul of the man and knew that it was Christ realized in the form of the man Jesus. So a practitioner looks at you and does not see you humanly. You may be presenting a beautiful appearance, a healthy appearance, but that does not fool the practitioner into thinking that you are spiritual. The practitioner still knows that all that he beholds with the physical senses is concept. But the practitioner, looking through the appearance of health and wealth, recognizes Christ as your invisible, true identity. And then, outwardly, you conform more nearly to that. Not yet fully. No. Jesus didn't conform to it fully until the ascension. In the outer, he was the Christ on the inner. He was the man Jesus with wounds on the outer. But from the moment of ascension, there was no man Jesus with wounds. There was only Christ exemplified, manifest, expressed, and there were no more wounds visible. He carried no wounds with him up on that cloud into heaven. No one carries a mortal concept of body into their spiritual consciousness. And that is why a practitioner on the spiritual path or a teacher on the spiritual path never takes your name or identity or the looks of your body or the diagnosis of your body into his meditation or treatment, because you cannot take a mortal concept into divine consciousness. They just will not mix. The only thing that can happen on this path, if you are called on for help, is that you do not look at the person you are helping, or do not look at their name or at their diagnosis, but look right through the center of being. If you have to look into a bright star up there and say, no, Christ is the only true identity of individual being, and keep your gaze on Christ as true individual identity, and you will bring out healing. But never call anything evil, and on the other hand, never call anything good. Not even Jesus. Why callest thou me good? There is but one good, the Father in heaven. Therefore call nothing evil, call nothing good. There is nothing evil, because all there is God manifest, God expressed. God individualized. And that's all there is, regardless of what you're seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, or smelling. But just because the appearance gets a little better, a little more enjoyable, don't go around saying, oh, you're spiritual now. No, you're not spiritual. Inwardly, in your inner being, you are spirit itself, and the degree of your realization of that brings out a greater and more harmonious appearance of good, but still appearance. You see that? All is God, but all that we see with the physical senses, see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, is in the realm of concept. So never look at a healthy appearance or beautiful appearance and call it good. Don't be satisfied with it. Don't be satisfied if you could pass a medical examination tomorrow and the doctor says you have another 100 years to live. Don't be satisfied. He's only talking about your physical life, and a little bomb could throw it out. A little germ could throw it out. An automobile hitting you could throw it out. Don't be satisfied to think that a good human appearance is spiritual. The only time and the only way that you can ever become aware of spiritual being is through your spiritual apprehension. The same faculties that enabled Peter to know that Jesus was the Christ, that is the faculty that enables you and me to know that we are the Christ. You'll certainly not know it by looking at it. No. We don't resemble it even when we're healthy, and even those who have the good fortune to be beautiful or handsome do not show forth the Christ. The only way you know the Christ, well, you know all those stories of people who were seeking the Christ and always seemed to miss it, and then usually at some time or other found that the little beggar that came to the door had been that very Christ. Why, certainly. There are thousands of short stories written on that very theme of people who are looking for the Christ, searching all over. But when a beggar came to their door, they didn't recognize the Christ. They have a legend in Hawaii of the same sort, Mother Peely, Madam Peely. She is the goddess of the volcanoes. And don't get her mad, or you're going to have that volcano stirred up. And how does she do? She tests the people continuously. You'll be driving along the road in your car, and some haggard little old lady will come up and want a ride, and you'll say, "Phew, no, I should say not," and you'll drive on. And then you'll find that night that was Madam Peely, and you got her mad. The next day you lost your job or got sick or something like that. And on the other hand, if you pick her up and give her a ride in town, chances are next day your salary will be doubled or your family will get well. Something wonderful will happen. If enough people keep angering her that way, that volcano is going to get stirred up. Now, a strange thing out there, that volcano has never killed anyone. It never has killed anyone, and that's because Mother Peely, Madam Peely, doesn't want anybody hurt. She wants them taught a lesson. So she stirs that up and lets it run so that you know that she's mad and you know that you've disturbed her. Now you better be good from now on. And usually you are, if you're Hawaiian. Now, it is in the same way that Christ is the identity of every individual. And to offend one of the least of these is to offend the Christ. There's more truth in that little story of Madam Peely than we believe. To offend one of the least of these, to ignore, to hurt one of the least of these, is to offend the Christ, because Christ is. That's the whole story of Matthew 25 in here. That when I was in prison, ye visited me. When I was sick, ye comforted me. When I was naked, ye clothed me. So forth and so on. What Lord, when were you in prison and we visited you? When were you sick and we comforted you? Oh, he winds up, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. And so it becomes us never to look upon a person as a human or as a mortal. And it is in this wise, in answer to this question, that you overcome this chemicalization and overcome this antagonism. You will not feel too much of this antagonism except in your immediate circle, where your own degree of spirituality may arouse the jealousy or enmity or malice of those who have not yet attained the measure that they believe they should, or probably the measure that they believe they have already attained. But ordinarily, you will find yourself well loved in this life by most of the people you contact if you make a practice of beholding the Christ of their being. Don't rejoice in their beautiful humanhood or their wealthy humanhood or their healthy humanhood. Get used to the idea of looking through the humanhood and beholding the Christ. Then, when you witness the deformed, mentally, physically, morally, or financially, it becomes easy for you not to condemn, judge, or criticize even the alcoholic or the alcohol itself, but you look through it and realize actually Christ is the only being and the all being. And anything that appears here, even though it's beautiful, is erroneous.